I'm Dan Kubisky, co-chair of the Society of Professional Journalists International Community, and welcome to another ICShort. We started these brief chats to return to issues and guests from our past talks. Today, we revisit the issue of press freedom in Hong Kong with Eric Wishart. Eric has been a guest on our IC talks and has provided regular updates on the situation in Hong Kong following the 2020 enactment of the national security law. He serves as the standards and ethics editor for AFP and is a member of the SPJ Standards and Ethics Committee. He lectures on journalism at Hong Kong University and Hong Kong Baptist University, focusing on feature writing and international conflict reporting. He has lived and worked in Hong Kong for about 25 years. Eric, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me back.
So before we get to the situation in Hong Kong, I do want to ask you about the war situation in Ukraine and the dangers journalists there face. You spend a lot of time thinking about the protection of your own reporters within AFP. So could you just, from what you've seen so far, how do you think the reporters are handling the dangers they are facing?
I mean, I see a lot of footage, as we do on TV, and I mean, as usual, a lot of the television journalists get up pretty close to the front. I mean, there was a CNN, quite a dramatic CNN sequence when there was a lot of shooting going on. You know, in these situations, I mean, how do you cover a war safely, Steen? It's very difficult. You can only minimize the risks. I think the big advantage for organizations like the AP, AFP, CNN, is that the people you send are trained to cover hostile environments, and I mean that's certainly the case for AFP. This has been coming. So we deployed staff in Ukraine who've had hostile environment training, and probably most of whom have been in some sort of conflict situation to a greater or lesser extent. And we have the gear, we have the transport, which is becoming a bit of an issue in Ukraine because of the refugee situation. So transport is getting difficult. We have the equipment. It's one thing if you work for a big news organization. Always in these situations, I'm concerned about freelancers. I have a journalist friend who I won't name who just suddenly popped up a couple of weeks ago in Ukraine. And I would be most surprised if he's done hostile environment training. I mean, he's a freelancer. I mean, how many freelancers can afford $1,500, $2,000 to do hostile environment training? So that is always the concern, you know. I mean, for the time being, it's kind of a conventional war, but it's quite possible it can degenerate into a war where there are no clear boundaries, and that's when it gets much more dangerous. But as always in a conflict situation, safety is the priority, and I'm always concerned about freelancers. They just don't have, I mean, things happen to staff reporters as well, but it's always the freelancers that are, I just always feel they're the most exposed, just because they don't have the financial resources to really protect themselves that a big news organization can provide.
Yeah, and that is an ongoing concern, and I know there are some organizations that try to help provide some training, but there really is no substitute for having a big organization behind you, such as AFP or CNN.
I mean, after James Foley was killed by ISIS, there was an initiative with AFP and other big media organizations under the DART Center at the Columbia School of Journalism to set out some standards on how the treatment of freelancers, you know, including things like insurance, you know, in a rule that we would not use freelancers in zones that were.
Okay. I see. There we go. I'm sorry. You seem to have broken up a little bit. I don't know if that was my internet or yours. Okay, I'd like to talk about Hong Kong now. It
Right.
seems to be a growing industry that to turn out reports and studies about the decline of press freedom in Hong Kong. And of course, the Hong Kong government denies there are any problems with that. Recently, the International Federation of Journalists issued a report, and they cite deliberate vague wording in the national security law, such as endangering state security. They also seem they talk about what seem to be undefined red lines for journalists. Uh, Late last year, our favorite place, the Hong Kong Foreign Correspondents Club, issued a survey that showed 85% of its members said the working environment has indeed changed in Hong Kong. So could you please just give us an update on the situation in Hong Kong? What about the ability of journalists to work freely without being arrested or detained for endangering state security?
I mean, if you look at what's just happened, I mean, the government can say what it likes, but obviously Jimmy Lai, who's the publisher of the Apple Daily, has been in jail for a long time now. The paper closed down. Subsequent to that, Stand News, which was a very popular news outlet, there was a police raid at the end of the year and it shut down, and two of its senior editors are on sedition charges. In the wake of that, Citizens News, which was another independent outlet, just closed, unilaterally closed, fearful of obviously a similar kind of police action against it. So, I mean, the reality is that journalists perceived by the government to be endangering national security do face prosecution. The government will say that Stand News was not a news outlet, it was an activist outlet, it was stirring up anti-government, it had an anti-government agenda, but the reality is I mean, if you look at press freedom and freedom of speech, the result of them exercising their freedom of speech ended up with them being remanded in custody and facing sedition charges. So obviously that leads to self-censorship. Big Ming Pao, which is a big newspaper here, which you probably know now, has quite a prominent disclaimer on opinion pieces. Opinion has been quite a target. Anything that's been perceived as encouraging foreign interference in Hong Kong and by extension China's affairs has been particularly targeted under the law. And I mean, in the FCC, despite having been in Hong Kong since 1949, which is the same year that the PRC was created, does get regularly accused of interfering in Hong Kong's affairs, which is a bit of a strange thing considering we're part of Hong Kong. And so, as you said, we had a survey of our members, our journalist members, last year, and 85% said that the situation had deteriorated, the press freedom situation had deteriorated since the NSL came in. Strangely, interestingly, one said it had improved, which is, I'd like to find out more about that. Everybody has the right to their opinions. But I mean, I think it was fairly typical of the lack of dialogue here that the Foreign Ministry response, and the Foreign Ministry has a big presence, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has a big presence in Hong Kong. After we published our survey, they said, we urge the Foreign Correspondents Club to stop sowing discord and refrain from interfering with the law-based governance of the HKSAR, Hong Kong Special Administrative Region Government, and Hong Kong's rule of law in the name of press freedom. It would have been nice if they'd come back and say, let's discuss your concerns, but that's not the dialogue. And I mean, if you want me to continue, I mean, what is looming on the horizon is a fake news law.
Yeah, I'd like you. Yeah, this has been up for a while. The police chief, every time he does a press conference, almost he talks about the need for such a law. So yeah, I was wondering if you'd be able to talk about the situation there, and what does it, if you can, what's their definition of what fake news is versus, let's say, a journalist's view of what fake news is, and how is that law, how is the law going to address the issue?
The problem is that, and the big concern is that they're going to use this law to criminalize critical or unflattering coverage of the government, and they're having a study. I mean, it came out quite recently. I think it was in the Hong Kong Free Press. The government is having this study. I think it's studying fake news laws, fake news, generic term laws outside of Hong Kong. They're looking at it within Hong Kong, and I think that we're going to find out the results in June. I think that's the timetable. But as far as I know, they're not consulting the media in Hong Kong. And like anywhere in the world, of course, there is disinformation, misinformation circulating online. Nobody denies that. At the same time, media professionals in Hong Kong are fact-checking and are verifying it and publishing debunks of this fake news, including my own organization, AFP. We have a big fact-checking operation in Hong Kong. So, I mean, it would be good if the government included us in this, and, you know, the fact that journalists often get branded as spreading fake news by the government, often it's critical coverage. I mean, when there were questions raised when the chief executive announced that Sinovac, the Chinese vaccine, was going to be the first vaccine available in Hong Kong, people raised questions. Was it because it was Chinese, et cetera, and it hadn't been given the full approval? You know, the kind of what's the word I'm looking for? You know, when the vaccine gets the official sort of
Approval works.
WHO approval, and she accused people who raised that question of spreading false, of malicious rumors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wasn't a malicious rumor; it was a legitimate question. So often, anything that's critical is dismissed as fake news. You know, mm-hmm. And the examples they usually cite, the government officials, the examples they tend to cite as fake news always seem to concern what the government is doing. So it's pretty clear that this will be used to target any coverage that that doesn't please them, and they will be the judge and jury because they have the information. You know, if somebody exposes something and they say, well, this is fake, and we know it's fake, it's going to be difficult. So it's, I mean, I think it's been proven that fake news laws are used to silence critical reporting. And I wrote a piece for that in the Hong Kong, the Foreign Correspondents Club magazine about a year ago, which I actually sent to the chief of police at the time. I think he was Chris Tang. It was before he became the security minister, saying I was quite concerned about the fake news law. And would he like to read my article and have a meeting? So I don't think he read my article, but they're moving ahead with the fake news law, and that cannot be good. But as I say, I just wish that the government would engage with journalists, because we fight fake news as well, but not through criminalization of it, of course.
Right. So this is a Hong Kong law that they're looking at, as opposed to the national security law, which was imposed by Beijing. Is that right?
Yeah. This will be a local law,
Okay.
And two people who published, it was quite interesting, nothing to do with journalism, but I think they ran a Taiwanese tea shop in Hong Kong, got arrested today they were spreading anti-vax stuff on social media. They get arrested, I think, under the sedition law. So basically anything, I mean, these days, if you step out of line, the red line is pretty easy to cross, So, I mean, the result for journalism here, I would say, is self-censorship, I think, as usual, it affects the local journalists more than the international media. There was a journalist from The Economist, had her visa refused, or a visa renewal, I think, refused towards the end of last year. But generally, visas have been okay, I think, for international media. I can't speak for all of them. And I mean, I'm not aware of particular pressure. I mean, we're still reporting on the situation in Hong Kong. I mean, a big problem for the international media here is just not being able to travel. I mean, Hong Kong, because of its zero COVID policies, just made it basically impossible. I did 21 days quarantine last year, and I don't want to do it again in a hotel at great expense.
I remember your daily posts of the food as brought to you basically through the cat flap door in the room.
Yeah, imagine if your viewers, you come back from a foreign trip with your daughter and you have to spend $5,000 for a 3-week quarantine in a hotel. I mean, it's so people aren't traveling, and that's a big problem for Hong Kong as an international center, but I mean, I think the fake news law is the next big one on the agenda. Yeah. And I mean, a very important thing, and this is a kind of a strange thing in the Hong Kong culture, and it's not just the media, is the job impact. I mean, more than 1,000 media jobs have been lost in the, I mean, the Apple Daily was a huge employer. I mean, I think it was 800-900 jobs went, but also Stan News and Citizens News. I mean, and I think some little smaller kind of independent critical outlets have closed. So conservatively, more than 1,000 journalist media jobs, including hundreds of journalist jobs, have been lost in the past year. And a lot of these journalists are now turned to taxi driver, driving taxis. One's running quite a successful sort of fried chicken store. A lot of them are saying it's just not worth the hassle anymore, and they're not, and there aren't the jobs for them, there are not the jobs anymore. So, and the question also is for journalism students. But what I've found at the 2 universities I teach at is that there's still my classes are full. I teach my conflict reporting class at Baptist University. I've got 30 students. It's up to the quota, and most of them from mainland China as well. Hong Kong University mainly. Hong Kong students, but there's still a lot of young people in the mainland in Hong Kong want to become journalists despite this difficult climate.
You had mentioned earlier some visa issues for foreign correspondents, or at least one particular case. I remember it used to be that if a journalist was denied a visa into mainland China, they would just switch over and be assigned to Hong Kong. But I understand that's now pretty much not doable anymore.
No, I mean, I think there was even when in the old days, I think they get kicked out of the mainland, they could come to Hong Kong. No, I mean, no, I mean, I think if you're out, you're out, basically. Hong Kong, Macau, and the mainland. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to wrap this up. Is there something else that you would like to mention that maybe we haven't talked about yet, that you think is important for people to understand of what's going on in Hong Kong?
I think that I think it's important to realize there are some really great journalists in Hong Kong. Great local Hong Kong young Chinese journalists are still covering Hong Kong. I mean, it's not, they're doing their best. They're very active on Twitter. There is still the international presence. I mean, you still read about it. I can still have this conversation with you, right? So, I mean, the one thing that always impresses me, I must say, is the standard of some of the local journalists. I mean, I think I did the one with Mary Hui with you. I think we did that. She works for Quartz. Was that you? Was that?
No, that wasn't us.
That wasn't you. Okay, that must have been. Yeah, I thought it was us. Yeah, I thought I did one about Hong Kong with you. But anyway, you can cut that. But no, I mean, there's some really great. I mean, I think it's important that people in America realize that we have some really great young local Hong Kong Chinese journalists and journalists from the mainland as well. So it's not this. The journalists they will still stand up and report. But there's been a real crackdown on anything that's been overtly anti-government, particularly anything that they think smacks of encouraging foreign interference in Hong Kong affairs. That's extremely sensitive. And the Hong Kong Free Press, run by Tom Grundy, is doing better and better. This is an independent English publication that actually its ethics code is actually based on the AFP code that I wrote. But they're still doing well. They're crowdfunded to a great extent, and they're surviving. And for the time being, they continue to report.
Yeah, I very much like the Hong Kong Free Press. I subscribe to them on their Telegram page, and I'm getting updates of their articles. It's very, very good journalism. And, some of the commentators are people that I knew when I lived in Hong Kong years ago. So, it's nice seeing some old friendly faces.
Sure.
Okay, Eric, thank you very much for being with us today and for this update. I
was trying to be a bit, I don't like it just can't all be doom and gloom. It's not all that cheery,
No, and I think it's important for people to understand there is still good journalism taking place in Hong Kong, despite what seems to be a growing pressure against free and independent journalism. Okay. Well, again, thank you very much for being on this talk. Look forward to hearing your reports out of the ethics committee with the SPJ. I think
very
it's always
excited
good
about
for our organization to get a foreign perspective.
Sorry, I talked over you there, but no, I'm very honored as a Scotsman working for a French newspaper and living in, not a French newspaper, as a Scotsman working for a French news agency and living in Hong Kong. I'm very honored to join the SPJ Ethics Committee, because to me, the SPJ Code of Conduct, Code of Ethics is the gold standard, and I make it mandatory reading for my students. So, and it's also, we also have AFP. It's French, but we have a big North America operation. We have a big headquarters in Washington. So we're not all based in France having long French lunches. But no, I'm really excited about being able to contribute to the discussion in the SPJ.
Great. I'm looking forward to it also. Again, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate your support and your comments.
You're welcome. Thank you.